This episode of the BeanCast is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you advertise on LinkedIn, you can build lasting relationships with customers that often translate to high-quality leads, website traffic, and higher brand awareness. For a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit, go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. Terms and conditions apply. Bandwidth provided by Recursive Squirrel Interactive. Transcription services provided by transcribeme.com. Visit them on the web at transcribeme.com/BeanCast for up to 25% off. That's transcribeme.com. Episode 517, The Truth About Social Video. Monday, October 22nd, 2018. It's time for this week's edition of the BeanCast, a weekly discussion about the news and issues facing marketers today. I'm your host, Bob Norp. Thanks for joining us. A few short years ago, both publishers and advertisers went all in on video, only to experience less than stellar results. Now we find that much of the viewership predictions were based on faulty data. How could this have happened? Tonight we'll discuss. Also, understanding IPG's purchase of Axiom, whether membership is the new subscription model, hacking voice for better results, plus this week's Ad Fail 5. That's the lineup. Let's meet tonight's panel. Thanks for joining us for this week's BeanCast. I'm Bob Norp, and with me on the panel for this evening, we start with Creative Director at Campfire, Mr. Nick Braccia. Nick, hi, how are you?
Great, Bob. Really thrilled to be back. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, next up, we have the Senior Director and Analyst for Customer Experience at Gartner, Mr. Augie Ray. I always love having you on the program, Augie. I think it's because I love saying your name.
Well, also, I like to say provocative and silly things, so I will strive to do so this evening.
Fantastic. And finally, we welcome a new guest to the program, the Global Executive Vice President of Business Intelligence at DeVries Global, Mr. Colby Vogt.
Hey, Bob, you got it. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be on for the first time and looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I managed to stumble through your name. Let me say it one more time. Colby Vogt. We're excited to have you on the program. Well, let me just jump right into the topics because we have a lot to cover. And first up, a group of small advertisers who are suing Facebook are exposing a giant problem that may have led both publishers and advertisers monumentally astray over the last few years. Now, this has some backstory, so let me go through this. Back in 2016, Facebook was so bullish about their video viewership numbers that they claimed that within 5 years, text views would represent only a small fraction of user activity on the platform that would be dominated by video views. Now, both advertisers and publishers took this to heart, radically adjusting their head counts and resources to accommodate the coming wave that just never seemed to materialize. And now we find out that Facebook's numbers were erroneously inflated by as much as 60 to 80%, and that they knew about it, but said nothing about it to their advertisers and publishing partners.
Shocked. I am shocked to find gambling in this establishment.
Now, obviously, Nick, the results of all this have been disastrous for everyone involved. But is online video still the future of social interaction? I mean, do we have to view this in a negative light entirely? What's your thoughts on that? Is video still the wave of the future? It's just not going to come as soon as we thought it was going to come.
I think it's always going to be part of the wave, but it's just a format, right? And social's protein is, from my point of view, is sharing. Sharing is what makes all online social interactions happen. And the fact is that it takes more time to watch and more resources to create and scale video. And that's not going to change. as long as people are kind of finding the reasons and the desire to share content, they're going to want to do that quickly. They're going to want to do that in shorthand, and text and image assets are always going to have a benefit there. There's certainly been, success with video. There's BuzzFeed's Tasty. There's an entire platform called Twitch. Video is not going anywhere, but it's just a format. I think that the notion of pivot to video was fiction. I think advertisers liked it because it skips ad blockers and it gets impressions that are easier to count. But I think if you're thinking that one format's going to take over social media, you're ignoring why people share, which we can tie back to what Henry Jenkins, Sam Ford, Josh Green talk about in spreadable media. They share for status, they share to show collective identity, sort of hashtags like Me Too, and they share to strengthen a personal bond. That's what is the lifeblood of social interactions online.
You know what?
It doesn't need a play button.
I have to caveat this, because it's just like I believe that video is easier and easier to share than it ever has been before. But really, the lifeblood of social is the people looking at the video or looking at the text messages or looking at the content that is provided. And it's all about the viewers. It's not about the sharers. So if it's about the viewers, that's where the weak link in video has occurred, because people are still looking at text messages as much as they're looking at video content, probably more so, and they're more interested in interacting in a text-based fashion. So I'm just wondering, from a social standpoint, is video the future? And Augie, I can sense you chomping at the bit. So,
well, yeah, video may be easier and easier to produce, but it's not easier and easier to consume. It takes time. You need to have your headset on. You see people who are, checking it at work, checking social at work, or walking down the street, which maybe they shouldn't do. Video takes more of the user's resources. And when the content is something that only video can produce, certainly something that's emotional, the action of sports, that sort of thing, then people want to consume that. But the very idea that people are going to give up the inherent scannability, the thing that makes social so addicting, to sit and watch, minute after minute of friends yammering instead of being able to scan text is ridiculous. And the thing that really kind of annoys me about this so much, as you can tell, I'm a little annoyed, is brands and marketers keep complaining that Facebook is leading them astray. And at the very time they were hearing Facebook say that video was the future, was exactly the same time when advertisers were complaining that Facebook had led them astray about organic reach and the power of fans. And so on the one hand, it's like they complain that Facebook lied to us and we invested in all these fan strategies and now we can't reach them. But, oh, look, they say everything's going to be video. We should just be led around by our nose with FOMO because they want to make money off of us. That's on brands. I mean, it was a ridiculous assertion, and I think anyone who understands how Facebook or Twitter or any of the social networks work would never have thought that 95% of the interaction was going to be video. It's just silly.
Colby, what do you suspect the main motivations were for this move by Facebook to be so bullish about video at the time? Was it, purely they made a mistake, or were they actively trying to, create some kind of deception so that people would feel comfortable again with the platform, like Augie seems to be suggesting?
Well, Bob, I wish I was behind those doors to give you that answer. I'm gonna play the straight card here to not accuse anyone of misleading intentionally. So I'm not gonna weigh in on that part of it, but I will chime in just briefly on what I think the power of video is, and I think the role of video into the future. I think, of course, the fact that this news was potentially, not potentially, was misleading is obviously a problem for a lot of brands. But what I will tell you, in my world, in communications and PR, brands are trying on an everyday basis to get at the hearts of its consumers. And the way to do that is obviously to connect through culture and to appeal on an emotional level. And I think video actually does represent the best way to connect with consumers and to create that appeal. I think, the question about consuming media is certainly relevant. I think we're seeing more and more videos that have the captioning available that makes it easier to consume, whether it's on a train or at work or whatever it may be. So I actually am still pretty bullish on the impact of video in the future. And I'll leave the, intentional misleading or accidental up to someone else to make that call.
Fair enough. Coming back to you there, Nick, I mean, about this subject, I mean, what's your take on the whole thing about Facebook being potentially leading people astray as opposed to just making a mistake? Because it seems like a legitimate argument on their part that the data was just wrong, and the data has just showed them something that they weren't really expecting.
My feeling with an organization that big that is still that young, I tend to believe that it's at least possible that maybe the left hand didn't know what the right hand was doing to some extent. And I also remember that it was a year ago, or a little over a year ago, in Q3 2017, that they launched Watch, which I don't know if it's has the traction that they thought it would, but I believe that they probably thought that they had good data.
Which would make sense. I mean, it's just like when you're talking about the situation with Facebook, I mean, it's, they have some, amazing data, but they also have some amazing challenges going on the platform, especially given their algorithm and trying to serve up the right content to the right people. Of course, it showed them that people were interested in a new shiny object, but maybe not as much as they thought it was. Augie, getting back to the whole thing about text versus video, when you're trying to create an interaction with someone on a social platform, video captures a lot of attention right off the bat because it is shiny, it is kind of movement, it is exciting, but when it comes to an actual interaction, it's all about the text. It's all about the actual content, right down to the fact that a lot of the videos that are displayed show a lot of text so that you can watch it with the sound off, like Colby was mentioning. So it seems to me from a strategic standpoint that we really need to double down on the textual portion of our contact with our consumers, whether we're a publisher or whether we're an advertiser, as opposed to just being entirely focused on video, or maybe using video to get that interaction of text-based communication.
Well, I mean, maybe we could just be mature about this as well and just say that video has its place, text has its place, audio has its place. One of my concerns over the last 10 or 15 years in digital is just all the bandwagons. And you don't have to wait too long for somebody to jump up and say podcasts are the future. Well, podcasts are great, as we know, since we're on one. But the idea that podcasts are going to push video out of the way seems pretty unusual. Text is the future, video is the future, audio is the future, it's all the future. And so smart brands are going to have a strategy to make sure that they're appealing to the right people in the right way. But that doesn't mean that video is going to rise. I just anyone who spends any time on Facebook, and I understand that lots of people have given it up, or at least some people have, but it's scannable and you scan down it. Now imagine if everything you scan down on your phone, you've got to stop and watch. And if it's your friends, you've got to turn on the audio because they're not going to have subtext. And even if they do have the text on the video, do you really want to sit for 2 or 3 minutes, or do you want to scan? And so I don't mean to beat a dead horse. It's just that we've got to stop jumping on bandwagons. We have to stop saying that this is the new thing and it's going to change everything for us. Social media was not free advertising. And so, we have to be smart and realize that people tended to try to avoid interacting with brands. They skipped ads. They listened to, and subscribed to audio so that they don't have to have advertising on their Spotify. They weren't going to welcome it in Facebook. And, the reality was all of the people who preached that this was going to be new free advertising were wrong. And it's just the same thing with video, this idea that everyone's going to give up text. We just need to be more mature and stop looking for things that are going to be the easy one answer that are going to give us direction, because marketing is difficult. It means understanding your audience, and in a fractured world with lots of channels. It means having to deploy content in all sorts of different ways. It's, I'm sure I'm just preaching to the choir to everyone who listens now, but I think any advertiser who believed this was both buying a dream and doing themselves a disservice.
But let me play devil's advocate for a second about the scannability, because when you're scanning through a social feed, the analogy is scanning through channels on a television. So you want to have something that catches the eye and gets people engaged with the content. And even if you're not using video, I mean, you're scanning through, looking at the pictures, and you're stopping at the pictures that interest you. You're stopping at the video that interests you. You're stopping at the big, colorful text message that, says something that catches your eye. And if it's all about trying to stop the scan and get someone into the content, doesn't that make a stronger argument for doubling down on video over time as a great way to get attention, as opposed to assuming that everybody's going to, interact with your content directly, as opposed to just stopping and interacting because it was kind of catching your eye?
So if all of the 700 or 800 brands in your life decided to start throwing video at you, would that make you stop and pay more attention?
They already do. That's exactly the model of reach and frequency.
And you don't pay attention.
But
that's why we scan.
But
that's why we scan past things that say promoted. I mean, look at the average brand's YouTube channel. I mean, how much engagement do brands get? I mean, some teenager can get more engagement on YouTube, and probably on average does get more engagement on YouTube than most brands. And so all I'm saying is video has a place. But no, I don't think that the world's going to be all video-based. We have to be smart and get the right content in the right ways. We have to be multi-channel and multi-content. It's hard work, but it's worth it.
Colby, when I'm looking at taking to heart what Augie just said, about the fact that video is not where you should double down, and that advertisers have always been attracted to the new shiny object, and they constantly go all in when they should be looking a little bit more critically at the situation. I mean, what does this say about the situation with advertisers and publishers themselves? I mean, are we just being led astray, or what's driving the intentional, ignorance that goes on within choice making about which kind of type of media you're going to play when you're using social interactions?
Yeah, I think the points made by Augie were spot on. I think, it's not that there's a particular medium that needs to lead or go away, but, I think I'll just add to a little bit of context that, I think that the core point is that the content that you're creating has to resonate with your audience. So that's the first thing, right? So whether it's video form or text form or whatever form it may be, I think that's the first challenge that exists. I think the second thing is, I think, you guys mentioned this notion of, you see sponsored content and you scroll right by it. I think that's where we're seeing the rise in influencers today, because now it's incredibly important that you deliver the message through someone that is deemed trustworthy or credible. And so if I see a piece of video content from a brand that I may like or maybe don't like, I may be more apt to look right past it. Conversely, if I see an influencer or an individual that I say, oh, I really like how this person thinks, or this person's a thought leader, or whatever it may be, I'm much more apt to probably engage with that piece of content. So again, I think whether it's video or something else isn't quite as important. I'm still a believer that video gives brands the ability to really communicate the essence of who they are as a brand and what they stand for. And I think the way that you still catch people's attention is probably through getting the right people to spread and share that message versus just always coming from a brand.
Well, I could talk about this forever because I love this particular subject. Talking about social media.
That would make for a very long podcast.
It would make for a very long podcast, but I'm going to move on, and I want to talk next about IPG's purchase of Axiom and what that potentially means for the holding companies out there as far as what they're going to be doing in the next few years in terms of their acquisition strategies. We're going to get to that in just a minute, but first I want to talk about our sponsor, LinkedIn. Look, when it comes to marketing your business, it's all about reaching the right audience at the right time, right? I mean, it's about connecting with people with a message that's going to resonate exactly the way it needs to resonate with them at that exact moment. So if you want to target your customers where they're engaging every single day and where they're ready to make a decision, LinkedIn is the place that's going to be the most powerful advertising platform you can come up with for reaching customers in your particular arena. Now, when you're advertising on LinkedIn, this is the world's largest professional network, and you're going to get the opportunity to build the kind of long-term relationships with your customers that you just can't find anywhere else. Relationships that translate into things like high-quality leads, website traffic, higher brand awareness. You know, over 575 million professionals engage with the content on LinkedIn, and chances are with that many professionals in one place, your future customers are going to be among them. And then there's the targeting. Don't even let me get started on the targeting here, because LinkedIn has the marketing tools to help you target your customers with a precision that you won't get on an average social network, because you can't just target things like, well, you're not just going to get targeting for things like age and demographics. You're going to be able to get down to the job title. You're going to be able to get down to the company name. You're going to be able to get down to the industry. And remember, better targeting equals a message your customers care about, which in turn leads to more trust built with your customers. And one last fact, I want you to keep in mind that 4 out of 5 customers who are on LinkedIn are decision makers at their company. Now, I'm going to say that again. I want you to pay attention. 4 out of 5 customers who are on LinkedIn are decision makers in their company, at their companies. So that means you're building relationships with the people who matter most to your business. Now, I'm going to give you a special offer. I want you to write this down. To redeem a free $100 LinkedIn ad credit and launch your first campaign, I want you to go to linkedin.com/BeanCast. That's linkedin.com/BeanCast for your free $100 ad credit. Now, terms and conditions apply. They're on the site. Check them out. Remember, LinkedIn, absolutely the best place for you to target your next business-to-business campaign. And we thank them very much for their support of this program. Well, this was a big week for data news with the acquisition of Acxiom by holding company IPG. So, Colby, what strategic value does IPG get from purchasing what is essentially a list vendor? And what does this move portend for the future of the ad industry as a whole? What's your take on this move? I know you can't speak a whole lot, but tell me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, happy to. So, as you mentioned up front, I work at DeVries, which is an IPG agency. Happy to discuss what's publicly available and been shared. I think, from my perspective, it gives IPG a really distinct advantage because, basically what IPG's had to do in the past is really basically rent data. And the challenges with that are, twofold. Number one, with a great deal of attention being placed on GDPR and other privacy standards, you're more at risk when you're not the owner of the data, because you can't necessarily guarantee the integrity of that data. So that changes the game right there, because of the fact that you've got the data integrity. There's a number of different vendors out there who may be acquiring data in ways that are not ethical, and you may not know that. So it, number one, takes away some liability. I think the other main point that's come out of this is the fact that IPG has, publicly stated that they had to turn away business, not only from a data perspective, but also just from a core amount of analysts that are needed. And so with this acquisition, it's not only just buying the data, but it's also buying access to a number of analysts that can provide some services for clients that it hasn't been able to provide in the past. So, frankly, beyond just from my view, a competitive advantage of having its own data source, but it's also the ability to, answer some of those complicated questions that clients have been asking at an IPG level.
Augie, what's your thoughts on this particular story? Because, Acxiom is everything that Colby says. It gives you an advantage, an unmatched advantage in terms of cleanliness of data, different types of lists of potential targets to be after, the analysts to support it. It gives you all the tools you need to be a data leader, but they're a holding company that's based on churning out advertising, essentially. It's like managing the message portion of the show.
I don't know about that. I just think of all the times that I've been on and we've discussed, and you've discussed with others in other weeks, that the agency model has to change. It has to become more like a consulting organization. It can't just thrive on the advertising alone. And I think this gives IPG a chance to do that. And it's not just the data that they have, the anonymized data on something like 2 billion or more consumers. It's also the 1,600 or more analysts they got. So, they're turning themselves into a data consultancy. And, the interesting thing, of course, and everyone knows this, but data is the lifeblood of marketing. It drives your advertising targeting, it drives personalization, it increasingly drives AI. So all that makes sense. The thing that I think is interesting, though, is that Axiom stock took a big hit in recent years, in part because Facebook started turning off the spigot of data because of all of the issues that they have with privacy. And of course, you've got GDPR. And so the thing about having all this data isn't just that it brings value, but it also brings responsibility. I feel a Spider-Man quote coming on here. I just think that regulation is rising, risks are rising. So I'm sort of interested to see how this works out. An agency owning this kind of data capability absolutely makes sense to me, but there's a big onus here as well.
Well, you brought up the fact that the agency model has to change. And when we talk about the agency model needing to change, it's usually a discussion about whether or not you need to be more like the consultancies. You need to be more of a consultative relationship with the entire C-suite, and you need to be focused on the entire business outcomes and generating shareholder value. When you're buying a data vendor, you're essentially just doubling down on the problem that the agency world has, aren't you? I mean, you're basically coming at them with another vendor relationship as opposed to a consultancy relationship. You're giving them access to the data that they need, but it seems like it's almost a little bit short-sighted, especially considering the fact that it was a sale for $4 billion, right? I mean, it's just like, am I wrong about that? It was a lot of money that was put on the table for this. So, I mean.
Yeah, well, I'm disappointed that it got bought because I was planning to win the Megabucks lottery. And, once I became a billionaire, I was going to make a play for it. The thing is that this is the way the agency model has worked, right? They buy up things and then they can offer it theoretically for cheaper, more practically for the same price, but with greater markup and margin. At the same time, they can integrate more. We know that agencies routinely rely on Axiom data. So the question I've got is, if Axiom is going to be as interesting to competitors, I wouldn't think that it would be anymore. And so will IPG get enough value out of it? But, I can't really comment on it. I think it's a big, complex, and interesting play for IPG, who, of course, has not been known for its M&A over the last several years. But I think it demonstrates the level to which data has become just so essential for marketing and for the agency relationship. I tend to think that this might work out. I mean, all pricing aside, I can't comment on that, wouldn't comment on it. But I think that the value of the data and the data knowledge will be quite great for IGP.
Well, speaking of the fact that a lot of companies are interested in the data side of the story right now, this week we also learned that P&G is pushing for access to more retailer data on the customers that their retail partners have. Colby, what factors are driving this? I mean, why is P&G going after I know why they're going after the retail data. They're going after the retail data because they need more data so that they can target their customers. But what possible incentive would the retailers have for freeing up this information, considering the fact that so many of the brands out there are trying to go direct to consumer and trying to augment their data plays so that they can do so?
Yeah. So, Bob, you're hitting at me with a couple of interesting cases. So not only do I work for IPG, but P&G is a big client of mine. So I will give you, again, a little bit of my insight on this. I think there's a lot of P&G brands that are still a little bit slow to adopt to a direct-to-consumer purchase. So there are things like deodorant, there are things like moisturizer, there are a lot of personal care items that people still, frankly, want to go to the store, see it. It's a low cost purchase. So today, and certainly it's on the rise. So I don't mean to pretend that .com and direct to consumer is not still important, but retailer brick and mortar sales are still far and away the huge majority of sales for a lot of P&G brands. And so I think that's certainly the reason why the interest is there. And I think the interest is there on the retailer side because, of course, selling those P&G products are also still very lucrative for the retailers. So I think, it's not a surprise to me. And so I'll leave it at that. But that's my primary, feedback is that retailers are still playing a huge role for a lot of P&G brands.
And Nick, I don't want to leave you out of this conversation entirely. I mean, it's just like, I know this is not your forte, but there seems to me, just looking on the outside here of this story, that this can't be an accident that everybody's going after. Obviously, all the companies out there, all the agencies have been pursuing more of a data-driven approach to advertising over the last few years. So that's not the surprise. But the fact that such big stories come out the same week shows me that there's some real movement in the industry, right? There's something going on that's crystallizing and making this a reality right now. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, my instinct is that I think some of it's probably very, savvy and smart, and some of it is kind of short-sighted. I can't speak to the details of the IPG deal, but I appreciated how upfront the brass was in their quotes with the press. I mean, the fact is that for a big player holding company, a strong data position is now table stakes. And when I look at the size of the holding company level RFPs that are flinging around these days and how crucial they are to who's going to sink and who's going to swim, big picture, or who gets consumed, it just seems to me, like I said earlier, it is table stakes, and it's something that I guess IPG thought that they were missing in previous, and missed out on previous opportunities. So they're shoring that up, and I certainly couldn't fault an organization for doing that, because I know, just talking to friends at other agencies, how important some of these wins will be.
Well, we're going to move on, and we're going to talk next about whether membership is becoming the new subscription model. Everybody's been talking about subscription being the savior of retail, and now membership is coming into play. We'll get to that in just a moment, but first, a word from our sponsor, AdRoll.
After months of strategizing and prepping budgets and looking at how we're going to position ourselves in the market, I didn't have anyone to fall back on. And I remember pulling the lever for all those campaigns, biting my nails, and just staring at the computer pretty much the entire day. This was the moment where, okay, we hired this guy to do exactly what he's saying. Now it's up to him to deliver. Trying to figure out the best way to serve ads to our customers. To me, it was a black box. AdRoll came in and said, we should target these users at this cadence, this frequency. We doubled our revenue based on what we were projecting for November, December. Succeeding after I've put myself on the line like that, it does give me confidence.
To find out how TeePublic and 37,000 other brands grow their businesses with AdRoll, visit adroll.com/BeanCast. That's adroll.com/BeanCast.
Well, moving on, MeUndies, an online underwear purveyor, has pivoted away from their original subscription model to a membership model designed to enhance the sense of brand connection and exclusivity. Now, normally I wouldn't cover a story like this, Augie, but with all the talk over the last few years about how subscription would be the savior of CPGs, should other brands be taking notice of this move? I mean, what's your thoughts on this move by MeUndies to go to a membership model?
This reminds me of the first topic where we talked about that brands and marketers have to stop thinking there's a one solution. And so 5 years ago, everyone wanted to be the Uber of their category. That stopped. And then, in recent years, everyone wanted to be the Dollar Shave of their category. And honest to God, if you go to Google and search for Dollar Shave Club of, you'll get over 20,000 hits. And the fact of the matter is that subscription models are interesting for a very specific need. And it isn't that I want to have 300 different direct commerce relationships with 300 brands for everything that's in my kitchen closet and my medicine cabinet. It just doesn't make any sense for that. And so if you go beyond the sort of FOMO screaming headlines about the growth and success of some of these models, what you find is they're not that successful. Dollar Shave Club, Birchbox, and Blue Apron were all held up as being great examples of the future. Blue Apron is struggling. Its stock is at its all-time low. Birchbox in the last year was reportedly so desperate to find a buyer that they were in a fire sale, that some labeled it as such. And eventually no one would buy them, and they took a reinvestment from one of their existing investors at a value that is just a shred of what it once was. Dollar Shave Club is a success because it got bought for $1 billion, but Unilever paid $333 for each of Dollar Shave Club's 3 million customers. They only pay around $70 a year. They have a churn rate that is 50% after 1 year. And, any of us on this phone call can probably take a relatively good guess at what their acquisition cost is. It wouldn't surprise me if it was, as high as $30 or $40 a member. And so the math looks really, really bad. I mean, it's head scratching to me. So here's the bottom line that I see as I look at these things, is that the reason subscription models haven't thrived is that most people just don't need them. It's easy enough to go to Jet or Amazon, see what you bought before, and say, hey, I'm running out of that. I'm going to add that back in. That's as much as it takes. It leaves me in control. I don't end up with more than I want or less than I want. There's really no reason to do a subscription model except for one thing. And here's where I think it gets interesting. It isn't that every CPG brand needs a subscription model. It's that subscription models work best when they are promotional, when they give people an opportunity to trial things. So people will pay for the opportunity to get a bunch of new products, try them, and then if they choose to continue to buy them, then the brand that helped to promote them in the first place, the subscription company, can profit because they now have gained a new customer. Those are the ways it tends to work best. I have a friend who loves getting a BarkBox for her dog because every month it's something new and different, and every now and then she finds that her dog loves something and it becomes part of her regular purchasing. So I just think that, once again, this was one of those things where everyone said the subscription model is going to save us. And it didn't. It didn't, just like the Uber model didn't save everyone, just like e-commerce didn't save everyone. You still have to think about this in a strategic fashion.
Is part of the problem that the types of products being sold are so low margin to begin with that you can't really make money on them effectively, even at retail? It's really difficult for consumer packaged goods makers to make money on products.
I mean, you need to focus on things that there's going to be margin on, that people are going to need to replace every so often. I maybe shouldn't admit this on the air, but I've never understood a subscription model for underwear. I'm not sure how often you replace yours, but I'm not sure I replace mine with the kind of alacrity that would require me to get a subscription model. Now, the other part of this question is the membership model, and it works out the same way. I mean, do I really need to be a member of my toothbrush company or my favorite cheese company? I guess it depends on what the value they're giving away is. The thing about Amazon with membership that I think is so fascinating about Prime is that on paper, Amazon Prime loses money. Amazon does not make enough money from the subscription fees it charges to compensate it for all of the free shipping and all of the free content. But the reason they do it, clearly, is that it drives enormous value in driving frequency of purchase and average order value, 3 times as high, according to many of the research studies I've seen. And so what you see is Amazon is thriving because it takes a very broad view of the value it gets from it, and consumers thrive because they think they're getting a good deal. And so the question is, what are all the CPG companies going to offer by way of membership that would be enticing enough for people to join? What are they going to give away, and what are they going to get in the end? And I'm not sure many CPG companies have a good equation for that.
Yeah, I can see the problems. I guess my point was more, though, to the fact that If you have a high dollar item, direct to consumer makes a lot more sense than it does for the low dollar items that CPG is traditionally known for. Because I can point to lots of direct to consumer advertisers who do tremendous amounts of business. I mean, it's just like Apple is arguably the biggest, most successful direct to consumer operation out there. I mean, the airlines, for that matter, while they struggle, for many reasons, are direct to consumer, a large portion of their business at this point. So.
Well, the problem with the high value items is that they're also not the kind that you tend to burn through and need to be replaced. They're also the things that take a little bit more consideration to buy. So it's not like you're going to put your, favorite brand of stereo headphones into a membership or subscription model and ask them to send you a new pair every year. This is just a tough question. What you have to be able to willing to ask yourself is, what are you willing to give up to people to get the membership or the subscription? What is the value that they're going to get from it? And how are you going to benefit in the end? And the answer is going to be, if you can create an opportunity for trial and testing that is affordable, then this is a wonderful way to promote yourself. But, a lot of brands are going to struggle with it, I think.
Nick, where and when does subscription still work in your opinion? I mean, it's just like if you had a client who was actively considering having either a membership or a subscription model put into play, what would you recommend when it came to the subscription model? Where is it still effective?
I think it can work in health and beauty, potentially. Anything that requires, daily upkeep, stuff like supplements, I think can work. I was a subscriber for a long time to a product called Shakeology. But even with that stuff, you can end up in an emotional situation. I guess I would compare it to the feeling you get when you're paying for a gym but not going to it, as things start to stack up. And I call that gym bitter, where you're like, oh, I'm donating my money but not going. And there was a point where I had bags of these shakes, and finally I went through the process to cancel. And it's always going to be tricky because it's coming that month, whether or not your behavior has been on par with your supply, or not. And what I was really interested about with this story was the distinction between subscription and membership, and if they're splitting hairs, or if it's a valuable distinction. Because in subscription, it's super binary. You're either in or you're churn, right? But in membership, I wondered if there were gradients, if there are ways to give people a little something, a little carrot, maybe something a little promotional, like Augie was suggesting, and then via that membership, kind of shift that into like some of the basic, almost like 20 years ago, Seth Godin permission marketing techniques. Once you kind of have acquired them as a member, that you can use to really optimize a passionate consumer. And I think that can work well for lifestyle brands, for home improvement brands, maybe for makeup, possibly for some apparel, but not for Brawny.
And that brings up the customer equation. Thank you for doing that, Nick, because I'd love to get Colby's opinion about where customers stand on subscription versus membership. I mean, have you seen any research, or have you done any research, or looked at any kind of intelligence at your disposal that tells you whether or not consumers are in love with subscription models, actually using them? Do they feel good about them? How do they feel about membership programs? I mean, what's your take?
Yeah, so my first take, first of all, on MeUndies and is there a difference between membership and subscription, is I think membership is just a nice skin, but I think it's the same thing in candor. So I'm not going to differentiate much between what is a membership versus a subscription. But what I can tell you is the little research that I've seen is actually that consumers are really appreciating and joining subscription services at a much higher rate. I do think, Nick, you brought up things that started backing up. I remember like maybe one of the original subscriptions that at least I was involved with was the Columbia House for DVDs and music. I'm getting stuff all the time, and I'm like, stop, right?
Me too.
But anyway, I think what we're seeing now is, consumers are really getting to a place of, convenience is so important to them. And if they feel that they're getting a good price, which most of these subscription services are promising, and they don't have to remember, oh my gosh, I've got to reorder or whatever it may be, we're seeing a lot of adoption. and consumers today are valuing it. So I don't know if it's the timing is not giving us that feeling of those things that are stacking up, like your Shakeology or what it may be, but we're seeing that it's incredibly important to consumers to get this convenient solution at a lower price. And then there's huge benefit to the brands, right? Because we know that once you get locked into a brand and it is a subscription service, unless you really go out of your way to switch, like you're locked in as a pretty loyal customer. So I think there's certainly, obviously, I don't think there's much surprise that there's huge benefit for the brands, but I think we're seeing that consumers are really apt to try this, and they're seeing the benefits.
But do they try it and stick with it? I mean,
So
let me back up. Let me back up because it's just like obviously when you get someone signed up for a subscription service, they're locked in for a while. But once they figure out that I don't need this much product and this is not working out for me, when they cancel, they never come back to that type of solution, right? I mean, it seems like it worked for a while, but now consumers are getting skeptical. Any thoughts
I think
on
this
that?
is, yeah, I think this is a lot like Uber. I joked earlier about the Uber of, and that lots of brands wanted to be, and that it didn't really work out of most categories. Listening to a discussion of how people are gravitating, this reminds me of the last 10 or 15 years to all the claims that people are gravitating to loyalty programs, right? Lots of data says people are gravitating to loyalty programs. Very little data shows that most loyalty programs actually get used with any frequency. The number of loyalty programs that people sign up for in which they're active is a tiny share of their total number. And so I think this is just the sort of thing where you have to ask yourself, where does it make sense? I jumped on subscription services for music very early on. I was one of the earliest adopters. I had a Zune. I am happy to admit that on the air, in part because I could pay $15 a month and sample all the music I wanted. And my friends couldn't believe it because they were still buying and ripping CDs at the time, and I never understood it. I was listening to more music than they were for less money. Now, that might not have been a great deal for artists, and that debate continues to rage on, but most people have now gravitated to subscription services for music and for entertainment, things like Netflix, because it makes sense for them. The question is, to what level do you need a subscription service or a membership service for, toothpaste and aspirin and that sort of thing? If somebody puts together something compelling, maybe, but I don't. This is going to be another one of those things that 4 or 5 years from now we're going to look back on, and some of the early leaders will have crashed and burned. They're not doing that well, and it'll make sense in some categories and not at all in others.
Well, this dovetails nicely into someone was going to say something. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think with a lot of the subscription products that are popping up, I look at it and I think about their margins, and I think about, for what they're selling, just what the cost per acquisition is and how they can even predict lifetime value for some of the niche products is really kind of baffling to me. A lot of the stuff that I feel like I see big subscription drive for, I see being interesting to a person for maybe 2 to 3, 4, 5 years of their life, and not after that. But I just wonder if they're considering the LTV when they put all this investment into acquiring the subs.
Well,
I'll just be clear and repeat the data on Dollar Shave Club, and I saw some of this from multiple sources, is that they lose half of their customers in the first year, and they're down to a 2/3 churn in 2 years. And I can't imagine with any reasonable margin and any reasonable acquisition cost that's going to be very sustaining. And I think probably it isn't, which is why after Unilever bought it, it's no longer just about shaving, right? Now it's about all sorts of things that you replace in your bathroom. Now, that might work really well for them through diversification, but I think this is going to be very selective, just like the sharing economy was very selective with sharing short stay homes and transportation by and large. I think the same is going to be true with subscription and membership models.
Well, I wanted to move into the last topic because I think it dovetails really nicely with what we've been talking about. Mindshare made the press this week with a big talk about how brands need to prepare for a voice purchasing future. And we know that voice is very much driven by the recommendation that is made by the brand and by the hope that you're going to get some kind of subscription. But while there are points about brand loyalty being diminished on voice platforms without aggressive optimization or well taken, Will any of it matter, Colby, in the end, considering the abysmally small numbers of users who are leveraging voice platforms to order anything? I mean, obviously, we're real excited about voice, but we're not using voice to shop in any kind of record numbers yet. And then there's the fact that optimization is a losing battle because you're only going to either be the recommended item or not be recommended at all when you're on a voice platform. So is it worth the time, effort, money? Is Mindshare right that you need to be hacking and making sure that you're coming up first on these voice platforms in order to maintain Mindshare? No pun intended.
Yeah. My take is that you had the key word in that question, which was yet. Because my take again, if I'm betting on the future, I actually believe that this is a pretty wise bet. That I think we are just scratching the surface in terms of thinking about voice, but the adoption of voice to talk to Siri to ask a question, talk to your Alexa unit, your Google Home, whatever it may be. I think we're on the cusp of that really exploding. I think people are getting much more comfortable not typing into their phone and typing into a keyboard and all those things. So I actually am pretty I'm a pretty big believer that the future of voice is really going to be huge. And so I think the brands that are getting to that place of leadership and getting on those recommend lists today are going to have a huge payout in the future. I think to your point, I don't know many people that go to their Alexa and say, hey, order me some soda or whatever it may be today. But I do think that is the future. Whether it's 2 years down the road or 5 years, I don't know. But I see that as a real strong area for growth down the road.
For repeat purchases, I completely agree with you. I mean, when you're getting into a situation where I always order the same brand of toothpaste, I can just tell Alexa, go order me this same brand of toothpaste that I always get. And it works for me. But shopping inherently involves a lot more senses than just your vocal cords. And that's not a sense, sorry. But, but it involves a lot more of the physicality of looking and touching and seeing and sharing and talking and all the different factors that come into play when we're out there choosing an item. And while I totally see that voice is going to play a big part in the way that we reorder stuff, I don't see any point in optimizing to be first in a search on a voice platform when the search is actually going on using your eyes on a website or your physical presence in a store, and then you're reordering via the voice platform.
Well, so Bob, what if the way I look at it is I think the voice is going to be the Google of the future, right? So I'm still going to ask the same question. I'm not just going to say order me toothpaste and it's going to say, hey, it happens to be Crest or whatever brand it may be. I think I'm going to ask Alexa or Google Home, hey, what's the best toothpaste I should be buying? I've got sensitive teeth, whatever it may be. I think, in my opinion, that interaction with the voice device is going to be very similar to looking at your screen. It's still going to have, hey, here's, here's what this influencer or this review site says is the top rated. So I don't see it operating much differently than how we're buying today online. I just think how you deliver the request or the question is probably different.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say I'm not sure I buy all of that. If you say to an Alexa, what's the best toothpaste for sensitive teeth, you will get pitched whoever buys the top spot, right?
Aren't we right now?
Yeah, well, true. But that's, I guess the point, though, is that if you can only hear one thing at a time. So we used to say you had to be on the first page, right? And that was 10 organic links and 2 or 5 or 7, depending on how many ran down the center, paid links. Now you're going to get one thing. I'm with Bob. I think that for reordering things that it's going to work really well. But one of the things is we like to see things. We also like to see prices and being able to scan. If I go to Jet and search for something, I get a whole page with different quantities and different amounts and different prices. Are you going to let Alexa choose what is really going to be the right deal for you? I actually had this experience because I wanted to try my Alexa. Now, I have since unplugged it because I'm trying to boycott Amazon Amazon a little bit, which is a completely different topic. But I had an Alexa, and I asked it to buy me underarm deodorant just to see what happened. And it arrived, and I compared the price, and I got ripped off because the thing that it said was the top result was pretty darn expensive. And so I just think that there is elements, not even so much of visuality, although there certainly is for some things like style and beauty and whatnot, but just the opportunity to sort things, to scan them, to see what looks right or not right, to look at prices. None of that happens with voice. And with Amazon and Google, who you may have noticed, both have a very healthy advertising business. I'm just not sure that it's going to work out the way you want. I would love it to. I would love to be able to have my voice device get to know me so well and have the right artificial intelligence so that I say, what is the right shoe for me? And it tells me exactly the right shoe. But advertisers want Google and Android to be able to put their stuff on top. And when there is no on top, when you get one result and then have to say next and next and next, I just don't think it's going to work the same way.
Well, with that, it's time for the Ad Fail 5. But before we get to that segment of the show, I do want to take this quick opportunity to thank my guests again and allow them to each do a shameless plug. Starting with Nick Braccia. You can find him at campfirenyc.com. That's the home of Campfire, which is now part of The Mill. If you don't know what The Mill is, you really should get your head out of your butt and pay attention. So anyway, tell us what's going on in your world,
this
Nick.
This is great timing for a shameless plug. So my colleague at Campfire, Mike Manello, and I created an original horror podcast for Shudder, AMC's horror streaming service. It's called Video Palace, and it drops tomorrow. All 10 episodes on the Shudder platform, which you can subscribe to for, I think, $5. And the first episode will be on iTunes and other places where you can discover podcasts. But
that sounds like a membership model.
It's definitely a subscription service, but just old iTunes podcast. You can get episode 1. We're really, really excited about it. I would describe it as Serial meets the Blair Witch Project,
and literally meets the Blair Witch Project because one of the hosts was involved in that project, as is Mike Manello. If anybody doesn't know that, he was involved with the Blair Witch Project. So fantastic. Next up, we have Augie Ray. You can find him at Gartner.com. That's the home of Gartner, which is a fabulous consultancy where he is the director of, senior director and analyst of customer experience. So tell us what's going on in your world, Augie. What would you like to promote?
Yeah, all I'll say is that, the usual stuff that Gartner has to offer. I just published some research on how brands can very specifically begin to tie the ROI of customer experience back to their business KPIs. It's a really big gap. Lots of organizations get started in customer experience with the best of intentions, but it runs into a roadblock when you start asking for money because what is the value of having satisfied customers? And so proving that is one of the big gaps that we see that many organizations have. And so if those listening are a Gartner member, they can look for the report titled Tailor Customer Experience Data and Metrics to Improve Customer Centricity. And if not, why not? You really should be a Gartner member. Another membership model. Oh my God, we're just wild with them.
Yeah, and again, membership and subscription works when you have a high dollar figure attached to it. So just want to put that out there for you. Last but not least, we have Colby Vogt. You can find him at DeVriesGlobal.com. That's the home of the PR shop where he is the global executive vice president of business intelligence. Did I get that correct, Colby?
You got it, Bob.
So tell us, what would you like to promote?
Well, so I would just say, at DeVries, we are really making some, strong inroads in terms of helping our clients lead through decoding culture. And one of the things that my group in business intelligence is really focusing on is drawing that connection to where if a brand has made a connection to consumers through culture, how are we able to measure the effectiveness of the work that we're doing? And so that's where we're really, focusing a lot of our attention and our focus on really cracking that code of understanding where the PR work that we do connects to tangible business outcomes. So you can follow me on Twitter just to see some of my musings on those thoughts around connecting the work that we do in communications to business outcomes.
That's awesome, and quite frankly, I was really glad to meet you recently at an event and actually go out and get coffee with you, because this is some amazing work you're doing over there at DeVries. So definitely check that out at devriesglobal.com. As for me, for more information about me or the show, visit thebeancast.com. There you can find a complete show archive. You can find how to consult with me. You can even find out how to advertise on this program. So check it all out at thebeancast.com. And don't forget, we now have transcription services available for all shows. You can find a transcription of this episode in about a week. And it's all thanks to transcribeme.com. You can get a special rate on transcription services if you go to transcribeme.com/BeanCast. And we thank them very much for their support of our program. Well, now it's time for the Ad Fail 5, a rundown of the lowest moments in advertising, marketing, and public relations from the last week. And first up, the Time's Up movement in the ad world was dealt kind of a blow when it was revealed that one of its key members, DDB's Wendy Clark, contracted Ted Breuer, the ex-chief creative officer of Droga 5, who was let go over accusations of sexual misconduct. Now, Miss Clark stepped down from the Time's Up steering committee over the revelations. Augie, I don't know if we want to touch this.
Well, we're all men on this call, so I think there is a little bit of a problem touching this. I'll just say this, though. Ted Breuer made money, and I guess Wendy Clark said me too.
I guess so. Now, next up, Nebraska has a new tourism slogan there, Nick. It's called, "Honestly, it's not for everyone." Now, this is either the stupidest or most brilliant headline ever, because, quite frankly, it's got everybody talking. Even Stephen Colbert made a big segment about this, making fun of it. So all press is good press, I guess.
As a copywriter by trade, I respect the line, but the fact is that the band 311 put me off Nebraska for life. So honestly, it's not for me.
All right. Well, Crispin Porter Bogusky announced that they were quitting all award shows, Colby. Then they gave themselves an award for doing so. All I'm saying is, who believes here? Who is going to believe that they're actually out of award shows for good? I mean, anybody?
No.
I don't buy it. No.
As soon as the client lists it as a KPI. I mean, I went through this 2 years ago when we were winning at Cannes, literally while Publicis announced their lack of interest in awards and that they were backing out. And I think that they're getting back in now. So, like I said, as soon as a client is interested in winning awards, they'll be back in there.
Bob, you just said there's no such thing as bad PR, so.
I guess not.
They were funny about it, at least.
Yeah, well, it was funny. It was definitely funny, but I don't believe them. And next up, the Houston Museum of Natural Science set out invitations for their annual Halloween event with the headline, "Party with Spooks." So, Nick, obviously they were simply trying to be racially inclusive with this line. I mean, I know it's one of those mistakes where you just go facepalm.
Listen, I'm actually very fond of Houston. It's a very diverse city. It's a great museum city. It's apparently not a great subject line city, because there were not enough rounds of approvals there. Somebody really, really screwed up.
Yeah, really, really messed up with that one. And finally, and this is not funny, Colby, but it's definitely shows you the problem with data. A woman whose baby daughter had died was forced to publicly ask Facebook to finally stop bombarding her with new parent ads. And it's one of those situations where you go, you couldn't have put that hook into the algorithm that's measuring all these well wishes and other types of things that are going on Facebook to see that maybe we shouldn't be marketing new parent stuff to her?
Tough. Definitely a tough day for Facebook, and I don't know how you get that algorithm right, but it's definitely one of those awkward moments.
Well, have something to add to this list or just want to discuss it? Comment online. Use the hashtag AdFail5. That's #AdFail and the number 5. And that does it for this week's show. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, visit our website at thebeancast.com and click on the subscribe link. If you're an iTunes listener, we've also provided a direct link to the iTunes Music Store, or just search for the BeanCast in the podcast directory of iTunes. And whichever podcast directory you use, when you subscribe, please leave us a review. Got a comment? Have a question? We'd love to hear from you. Just send your emails to beancast@gmail.com. Opening theme was performed by Joe Seibel. Closing theme by C. Jax. Thanks for listening. I'm Bob Norp. We'll be back again next week. Hope you'll join us then.
It's like, you know what I mean? It's like if it's, you know what I mean? I don't know, man. Just like, okay, it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's like totally like that. It's like, I don't know, like if it's, you know, it's like, you know what I mean? Yeah, it's just like kind of, it just seems like it's just like almost exactly. It's like exactly. Yeah. You know what I mean? Exactly.
Cool beans.